A Wisconsin court says a teenager will have to face trial in adult court for allegedly sexually assaulting and killing a 10-year-old when he was just 14. His defense team argued there were factors that meant he should stay in the juvenile system, but an appeals court disagreed. We're taking a closer look at how we got here and what happens next with a retired detective. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Okay, this is a horrific story. It's out of Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin. We've talked about this one before. April 2022, 10-year-old Liliana Lily Peters was killed and sexually assaulted. And that is, by the way, the order of which things happened here. Her body was found in the woods near her home. The person who has been arrested and charged with her murder and assault is reportedly her older cousin, although to be clear, we can't confirm that due to privacy issues in this case. But what we do know is this suspect is being identified as C.T.P B in court documents. It includes the middle initial and the double last name. We're just going to refer to him as CPB. Now, we told you this back in January of this year, that the suspect would be tried as an adult in the Wisconsin court system. His defense team appealed that decision to a 3-judge panel at the Court of Appeals, but that court has just upheld the lower court's decision. So we want to give you a little bit of backstory on this case. 10-year-old Lily Peters was reported missing by her dad on April 24th, 2022. She was out on a bike ride to her aunt's nearby home, but she never came back. During a search, her dad found Lily's bike in the woods less than a mile from her aunt's home. Her body was found the next day, not far from where her bike was. She was naked from the waist down, just disturbing to think about. And 2 days after she was reported missing, authorities say, again, the suspect, then 14 years old, admitted he rode on a hoverboard and Lily rode her bike as he lured her down a trail. And he allegedly told investigators that it was his intention to rape and kill her. So before I go into this anymore, I want to bring on a special guest. I'm joined right now by former NYPD detective and host of the Gold Shields podcast, Tom Smith. Tom, so good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much.
And we are recording this actually on 9/11. So let me just say once again, thank you so much for your service. I know it's a difficult day, especially on today with so much going on. I appreciate you coming here on Sidebar.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Thank you for those words.
Of course. So Tom, you know, this is, for me, the deaths of children are the worst kinds of cases. They're the ones that are the hardest to report, the hardest to make sense of. It's unimaginable to think about what happened to this young girl. What is your reaction to hear a case like this, and have you ever investigated a case like this?
No, not a child's death, but been involved in them. Not particularly my case, but been involved in those investigations. And they're the hardest because they're the most vulnerable, they're innocent, and yet they become victims of these horrible crimes. And they're tough to deal with because the families, the parents, that you have to convey what's going on and keep them in the loop of what's going on in the investigation. So they're always, always difficult.
Are they tough? Are they different to investigate? Or is, in other words, obviously aside from the fact of how emotionally taxing it is, but would you say it's different to investigate these kinds of cases versus an adult-related crime? Or unfortunately, when you're dealing with a dead body and you're dealing with this kind of crime, it's the same kind of circumstances?
Well, you know, it depends on your family life. You know, detectives are humans. You know, if you have kids, you have families, you can't help but to maybe put yourself in those parents' shoes sometimes. So do you pay a little bit more attention to it? Yeah, a little bit, but you treat every victim obviously the same way, and you go about the case the same way with the same vigor and want for a prosecution and get the bad guy, which is what they did here.
And what about when the suspect is a minor?
That you have to be careful of, because that, you know, when you're dealing with a minor, you have to make sure every single thing from the beginning is done correctly, because you don't want anything down the line to be thrown out or not be able to be admitted in court. So yourself, your bosses, your partners, and the DAs all have to be on the same page about how you're going to proceed forward with a juvenile.
This is a tremendously difficult case to cover, but it is an important one. It's an important one to follow as it makes its way through the legal process. And I have to call out one of our sponsors because it's through their support that we are able to continue to bring you shows like this, to continue to break down these cases. And today I want to talk about Upside. It's a great partner of ours. It offers a really interesting service, by the way. So Upside is a free app that gets you cash back on daily essentials like gas and groceries. So if I pump my gas and I use Upside, I could potentially get cash back, real cash back. It's money that appears in your Upside app that you can transfer straight into your bank account. So once you have the Upside app, you claim an offer for whatever you're buying on Upside. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card. You follow the steps in the app, you get paid. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on screen and use our promo code Sidebar and you'll get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Again, thank you to Upside for sponsoring this episode. So let's get into this a little bit. CPB's, go back to him, CPB's criminal complaint charges him with first-degree intentional homicide, first-degree sexual assault, first-degree sexual assault of a child under the age of 13 with resulting great bodily harm. And the statement of probable cause describes an absolutely brutal attack. Quote, he stated once off the trail, he punched the victim in the stomach, knocking her to the ground. Remember, this is a 10-year-old. He stated he then struck the victim in the head approximately 3 times with a large stick. He stated he then straddled the victim while victim was lying on her back and strangled her until he believed victim was deceased. And it's at that point that CPB allegedly told investigators he tried to sexually assault Lily. The criminal complaint says that CPB got scared, so he went home, showered, put his clothes in the laundry. He stated he then heard that victim was missing and determined he needed to hide her better. He stated he returned to victim's body, drug her a few feet, and covered her with leaves. Now, an autopsy was conducted and it detailed Lily's extensive injuries. A forensics team even said that DNA found on Lily's body matched the defendant. So now, Tom, we're seeing not only the evidence building up, the horrible nature of this crime. What do you make of it?
Planned, premeditated, knew what he was doing, knew what he was doing and the repercussions of it. And the biggest part to me in that whole scenario is understanding they were looking for her and going back, moving the body and covering it. That for me is the nail in the coffin.
Sloppy though, right? I mean, look, minor, he's underage, but I've seen this in adult cases too, where, you know, your efforts to hide something, they don't really work, and sometimes they leave even a worse trail. But what does that tell you that went back to try to dispose of the body?
What it says to me, he knew exactly what he did.
Right.
He knew exactly what the repercussions were going to be. And if he left the body where it was, she was going to be easily found. So he tries to hide it. And you talk about the sloppiness of it. Yeah, whether you're an adult or a minor, your first time doing something, you're going to panic. You're going to get stressed. You're going to jump to act on covering it up like he did.
Yeah, and it's difficult to think about this happening to an adult woman, but to hear this happening to a 10-year-old, it's unthinkable. So, as you can imagine, the state of Wisconsin stated its intention to charge CPB as an adult. Now, on one hand, given the gravity of this, whatever state it would be, you could understand why he might be charged as an adult, but it's our understanding that under Wisconsin law, anyone who's at least 10 years old and is accused of first or second degree homicide, they are considered an adult in Wisconsin's court system. The defendant, by the way, turned 16 in March. Now, there was a reverse waiver hearing that was held over several days in August. Now, that is a determination about whether the case should be moved from adult court back to juvenile court. First, Tom, I'll go to you. You believe this is a case where he should be tried as an adult?
100%. Not even a thought. You know, and you have to take into consideration the planning of it, the actions in and of itself, which are horrible. And then the cover-up, like I said, going back and knowing what he did. He was fully aware of what he did and tried to cover it up. All of that factors into an adult thinking. I don't care how old he is.
Because, and this is what it is, the difference would be punishment, right? If you're found guilty in adult court for something like this, you could spend the rest of your life in prison. Whereas in a juvenile setting, there might be a situation where you are released at some point. But you believe that this is a situation that the perpetrator, if he did this, knew what he did, and the punishment should fit the crime.
No doubt about it. You have to be accountable for your actions no matter how old you are.
Now, the defense, they did argue at this reverse waiver hearing that C.P.B. should be in juvenile court, and they had testimony from experts who diagnosed him with psychological disorders, and they let the judge know about his rough upbringing. So, for example, according to court documents, the defendant's father went to prison for 3 years for, of all things, possession of child pornography, and he was also found in possession of several crack pipes. The boy's parents divorced when he was 2, but they had joint custody. Now, Tom, before we go any further and we think about the suspect, what he's charged with, we think about what he's accused of doing, that background, that environment, is that surprising to you? No,
not one bit. You know, you look over the history of criminality, and killers, murderers always have a bad background, whether it's abuse in the house, alcoholism, exposure to pornography, which has played maybe a part in that. So no, I'm not surprised one bit.
It's a pattern almost, and you see it. So in other words, what's a chilling pattern is the father's arrested for possession of these illicit materials, and then his son is arrested for sexually abusing and murdering a 10-year-old girl. You can see that pattern. You see those patterns.
Absolutely, no doubt about it.
Yeah. So back to this hearing, the prosecution, they didn't call any witnesses during the reverse waiver hearing. The judge took it all into consideration, issued a ruling in January, kept this case in adult court. Now, the defense appealed, and they appealed to the Wisconsin Court of Appeals, and they argued that the lower court made a mistake, that the ruling should be overturned. In their brief, C.P.B's attorneys wrote about the testimony from several psychologists who interacted with the defendant. I'm going to let you know what they said. So we had Dr. Caldwell, diagnosed C.T.P B, with autism spectrum disorder and unspecified anxiety disorder, and testified that his clinical needs supported transfer to juvenile court. Dr. Benson diagnosed him with autism spectrum disorder and persistent depressive disorder. He testified that C.T.P B's treatment needs cannot be met in the adult system. Then there was Dr. Garbarino testified that C.T.P B's offense is characteristic of an adolescent crisis, and that supervision until age 25 would be sufficient to address and overcome the adolescent crisis and would not depreciate the seriousness of the offense. The defense team noted in its brief that Dr. Caldwell believed that C.P.B's social functioning was on par with a kindergartner, despite him being 14 years old. Dr. Benson testified that this boy's emotional maturity was in the range of 4 to 6 years old. The defense also noted that C.P.B had an addiction to pornography, which was exacerbated by his autism disorder. And to bolster their argument, the defense offered multiple legal examples that offer insight into juvenile court cases in Wisconsin and around the country, as well as standards of care that he's afforded under the law. And in their brief, it reads, quote, "For C.T.P B, treatment of his ASD requires intensive one-on-one therapy that is not available in the adult prison system." So before we go any further, Tom, you gave your perspective on it. When you hear that, does it change at all?
No, not at all. That's their job. They're on the defense team. I would like to hear the prosecution's experts questioning him and do their own testing and see what they come up with. But you have to lay out, when you hear all this stuff on the psychological profile of a criminal, you have to take into consideration the timeline, his actions, what he was thinking, how far he went to cover it up, what he thought about beforehand. This was clearly a lucid decision that he made. So you could take all of that into consideration, that's fine. But when it comes to his actions that he still has to be held accountable for, in my opinion, were completely lucid and planned out.
Would there be a situation where a juvenile commits a murder and you say, you know what, this does belong in the juvenile system? What would be an example of that for you?
Oh, there's probably many that we could go through. A lot of times when you get into that kind of gray area of that, a lot of times it's a juvenile committing a crime against their family, because of certain things that are going on in that family, abuse, neglect, all that. Those cases are difficult, and those kind of find their way back into the juvenile system because of the circumstances of those crimes.
Yeah, and so the court, they look at the seriousness of the crime, and when you talk about rape and you're talking sexual assault of a body and you talk about murder, very mature, adult, conscious themes that we're getting into. Now, the defense, they also referred back to what the psychologist testified about when it comes to a convicted felon reoffending. So they say, quote, Dr. Caldwell testified that adult court prosecution actually increases the risk of reoffending in the future. Dr. Benson testified that providing insight as a form of specific deterrence does not work for children with ASD because they do not understand. With regard to general deterrence, Dr. Caldwell testified that there is no scientific basis to conclude that prosecuting a specific juvenile in adult court accomplishes a goal of general deterrence for other juveniles. Tom, what do you make of that?
You know what? It's on top of, I still think, him being accountable for his crimes. It also sends a message to other juveniles in the same situation. You know, they hear, criminals, juveniles, they have social media, they know what's going on. They hear, oh, he got away with it. Other defense teams, oh, he got away with it, and end up going to a juvenile facility for a significant less time. And I think it also sends, that message can get skewed in, future investigations.
Now, the teenager's defense team goes on to say that, quote, putting C.T.P B in adult prison for life is not necessary. It will not motivate change or cause change. It is only punishment for the sake of punishment, which is not what the law permits for juveniles. Goes on to state, quote, in this case, everyone agrees that C.T.P B should be punished. The question is both how and how much should we punish him. By placing C.T.P B in juvenile court, he will receive the punishment he deserves, while also receiving the help he needs. This outcome will not depreciate the seriousness of the offense. Now, in the end, the three-judge panel decided that the trial court had it right, that CPB should be put on trial in adult court for the murder of this young girl. Quote, the court's decision shows that it examined the relevant facts, applied a proper standard of law, and used a demonstrated rational process to reach a decision that a reasonable judge could reach. As such, the court did not erroneously exercise its discretion. Now, the defense could petition the Wisconsin Supreme Court to review. We'll see if they'll take it up. Right now, there's no updated hearings for CPB's case in Chippewa County Circuit Court. Tom, do you think that, I imagine you think that's the right decision after hearing all the evidence? You agree with the appeals court, right?
Wholeheartedly, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it's an adult, it's a crime. You murdered this poor 10-year-old girl and then attempted to sexually assault her. You planned it. You tried to kill her on a couple of occasions by hitting her with a large stick a couple of times, then choking her, then leaving her there. Completely premeditated and planned out, and it should be in an adult court.
So when they say the defense, they're just punishing for the sake of punishment, what's your response to that?
Well, the defense team, that's their job.
Right.
You can't take anything away from them. They're defending their client, and they're trying to get the best deal for them. You can't fault them for that. That's their job. But in the end, they came up with the right decision of trying him as an adult.
Really awful case. We'll continue to monitor what happens next. Like I said, they might petition the Supreme Court. Not sure they'll come up with a different decision. But Tom Smith, good seeing you.
Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. Speak to you next time.